Hello everyone. My name is Wesley, this is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a Chinese egg dish, I guess it's like a dim sum dish, probably more commonly seen for breakfast, called egg foo young. We're going to be doing it in a unique way, one that I've never come across before until I found an interesting approach to it on the internet. So we're going to be taking a look at a deep fried egg foo young today, which is very interesting to me, probably because most commonly the egg foo young that you come across in most American Chinese cuisine is not deep fried, it's probably wok fried and then like scrambled, so it kind of looks like a frittata, although frittata is technically not fried. But today what we're going to be doing instead is deep frying it, which is going to give us a little bit more of a fluffy and like lighter and airier texture from the deep fry than you would otherwise get. So if you've ever had egg foo young and it looks or like kind of tastes a little bit rubbery, that comes from the fact that woks are extremely hot, which means that when you try and fry eggs, it will usually cause issues. Ooh, are we losing the internet? Nope, just a really bad connection. Cool. Yeah, so it will usually cause issues because it will create like a more of a rubbery texture than you will generally come across. There are a couple of ways around that. My most favorite way of getting around that is by using cornstarch in your egg batter. But another really great solution to that is not scrambling it at all. What we're going to be doing is dropping it into a fryer, and that's going to give us this really, really bubbly and airy texture that you generally won't come across in a egg foo young that is scrambled. Excuse me while I figure out what's going on with this camera. There we go. All right. Sorry, fun camera problems today. So yeah, if you're looking for the recipe for this, it came out over on the YouTube channel that was on Friday last week. And that's all lives over there. So if you are trying to reproduce what we're cooking today, oh man, is the audio busted too? One sec. Check, check, 1 2 1 2, check, check. Cool, I think that solved it. Yeah, lots of problems on Reddit lately. If it's still not working or if it still craps out, I've heard that the YouTube channel has not had any problems. So, which reminds me that we're also concurrently live streaming over on YouTube. So if you do have problems with the Reddit stream, hop over to the YouTube channel and there's generally a little bit better. Thank you for the heads up though. Cool. That's also the rice singing, telling us that we're done. Cool. So next up, what I just finished doing, that was 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by what we're doing next is about a tablespoon or 1 inch's worth of ginger. So we're going to peel it with the flat side of a spoon. And that's going to be sort of like the base layer of umami. We're going to be using this in our chicken today. So actually, that kind of reminds me because I forgot to mention, but so if you're not familiar with an egg foo young, it probably is most commonly found in like Chinese American cuisine. So I am Chinese born, or Chinese American born, and I have not ever had egg foo young before. It is not really a traditional Chinese thing. It mostly comes from Chinese American food, and it more specifically comes from like Chinese American takeout. Because it's a dish that originates from Chinese restaurant chefs in America making use of like leftover scraps. So there is a recipe for this egg foo young. It lives over on the YouTube channel. But if you are particularly trying to follow it, I would say is that you don't necessarily need to follow it to a T because it's really a recipe that's intended to use whatever you happen to have in the fridge. So today we're going to be using half of an onion because it's what I have left over, and then some bean sprouts because those are also the spoil, and then a little bit of chicken thigh, and maybe a bell pepper. I can't remember if we have bell pepper left. So all this to say is that there's a recipe. You can follow it if you want, but if you don't have everything that you need to follow that recipe, just use whatever you happen to have in the fridge, and it will probably work out. So it's kind of like a fried rice in that respect. It's meant to use whatever you happen to have left over. So today we're going to be using those ingredients, but for your own attempts, if you are trying to follow the recipe, use what you have. Hermina, yeah, how's it going? Yeah, happy Monday. Good weekend. Yes, very good weekend. I got the second vaccine, so I'm fully vaccinated. A very good weekend. Yeah, oh cool, the mics are fixed. Thank you. Thank you for the heads up. I always appreciate that. I also don't generally know when the mics are busted, so please do keep letting me know. So that's our ginger and garlic. This is going to go in with our chicken, and it's going to be part of how we impart flavor to our chicken. So that's coming up soon. Next up are some green onions, which we are going to be using in 2 separate places. So pretty similar to how I approach green onions in a lot of different recipes. Is what we're going to be doing is separating the whites and greens here. So here, we're going to start with our whites first. So I'm going to remove the greens here, and we're going to slice those up as a garnish towards the very, very end. So those are actually not going to be cooked at all. And then we're going to take the greens, or the whites, and throw these in with the eggs themselves. So the whites of a green onion happen to be a lot more durable than the greens of the green onion. So if you notice, the greens have like a lot more durability to it, whereas the greens are a little bit more flexible. So if we were to try and throw these in with any kind of wok fry, it would probably just fall apart. So very, very often when you see me using green onions, you'll probably see me separating them first. So here are the whites, and these are going to go into our eggs. And then next up will be our greens. Oh, the Asian, oh man. Hello there, awesome. Yeah, I'm really sorry for that. I noticed that actually, so like very often, probably with most of the streams, so I actually did want to talk about that, and I'm glad that you tuned in again so we can talk about it. So I actually, very, very often, I'm not looking at the chat because super often the chat will scroll too fast before I see stuff, so I didn't actually know what was happening. But I blocked that guy, so he won't be able to tune in anymore. Yeah, I recommend you block him too. Whoever it was, whatever it was that was going on, seemed kind of sketchy, and I'm kind of surprised that the mods didn't catch it either. But they're probably busy, so I just blocked them, so whatever. I'm sorry that happened to you, though. Cool. Yeah, oh, Real Dirty Dan. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that people follow me on Reddit. It's new. All right, so next up, for the greens of our green onions, I'm slicing these up on a bias here. So a bias meaning that we're cutting it diagonally. And the diagonal chop will get us these nice wide bits of green onions, which is really nice for a garnish because it kind of makes them stand out a little bit more. So you can also cut them just straight, but either way, I always do recommend whenever you're cutting green onions, cut them on a back slice. So what you see, what I'm doing right now is I'm pulling the knife backward in this direction, whereas if I were pushing down on it, you'll notice we could do it with the last bit. More of the green onion stays on the cutting board, so you see how there's like little bits of green onion that are sort of like mashed into the cutting board. That's because when you push down on your knife, it kind of like shatters the cell structure of the green onion, and when that happens, you don't end up with as much green onion, so it's kind of removes a lot of the important bits of that green onion that you're trying to preserve. So if you cut it with a back slice, it's a little bit more delicate and will protect some of that like really, really delicate structure of the green onion. So it takes a little bit more effort because the back slice is kind of like a little bit more tricky of a slice to learn, but if you take the time to learn it, very, very useful for green onions. And then really anything else that's delicate. I do the same slice for like things like cucumbers, anything that's really delicate. Cool. All right, next up is literally a leftover onion. You can see that it is pretty withered. I forget how old this onion is. I think it's maybe half a week old or so. If you don't have onion, you could substitute it out. You could use a bell pepper. You could use a purple onion. You could use a shallot. You could leave it out entirely and replace it with something else that's a veggie. I personally love using onions in egg foo young because I love onions. But either way, use whatever you happen to have. Today, how are we slicing these onions? I think I'm doing them strips. So real quick, so this is probably the first time I've sliced an onion in a while, at least on stream. What I've discovered is, so a big problem with onions, this is kind of a nitpicky thing, but I do think that actually makes a little bit of a difference, is that onions are spherical shaped, so they have this dome-like structure to it. So if we slice straight down, what's going to happen is the end pieces onto your onion on this side and this side are going to be slightly smaller than the middle cuts right here, because this is part of the onion that's a lot thicker. So what we want to do is, instead of cutting it directly down, and I think Kenji Lopez actually did like a mathematical analysis of an onion to figure this out, but there's a specific angle, I forget what the exact angle is, but essentially what we're going to do is cut the onion on an angle, like so. And then what you end up with is a little bit more even of a cut. So hypothetically, what you should end up with are end pieces that kind of look like this, and a middle piece that kind of look like this. So they're probably going to be a little bit closer in size and shape. Now, this is not going to be exactly perfect unless you get the exact angle correct. But it does, in my opinion, it solves one of the big issues with slicing onions, which is that the end pieces of your onion are always going to be slightly smaller than the middle pieces of your onion, which if you're wok frying them, or deep frying them in particular today, that's going to be a big problem, because if you have like little pieces of onion like this, for example, that's just going to burn, and it's going to fry up in the deep fry, and then it's not going to be anything. It's probably just going to be burnt bits in your final stir fry, which is not good. Brandina, did I work in a restaurant? I did not. No, I did not. I have never worked in a restaurant. I used to play music for a living in a lot of restaurants. And then COVID stuff happened, and now I cook stuff on the internet, so that's cool. Am I doing chicken right now? Yes. Cool. Cool. Next up is our chicken thigh. You could also use chicken breast, you could use steak, you could also use ground beef. I know that lots of people use ground mince in their egg foo youngs, which is also a good option. You could really use any kind of protein you want. You could use tofu. There are lots of different solutions to an egg foo young. I love doing it with turkey thigh, or chicken thigh, because it has a little bit of extra fat to it, so it kind of gives us a little bit more heartiness and a little bit more like richness and flavor to the protein element. So, there we go. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice these up into maybe about 1-inch pieces, maybe a little bit smaller than that. And then we're going to drop this into a marinade. So super, super important, because chicken thigh has so much fat in it already, is that we don't want to get too heavy with the marinating element here, because the more liquid that you introduce to your elements that are going into the deep fry, so that includes the chicken, but also all of the veggies and anything else that's going to be included in the egg foo young itself. We want to be very, very cautious of how much liquid we introduce there, because if you introduce too much liquid, eventually what's going to happen is it's not going to bind properly anymore. So that's obviously going to be an inherent problem with trying to deep fry eggs, which is, if you've ever done that before, it's really, really difficult because eggs are really, really loose. So it's very different from trying to deep fry, say, like fried chicken, for example, because fried chicken has a lot of structure to it. So it's not going to like fall apart in the wok fry. But for an egg foo young, like what we're about to do, it's going to be really loose because it's literally just loose eggs. So we're going to be putting like basically scrambled eggs into a deep fryer. which means a couple of things. The main thing it means is that it's going to be really, really delicate. But the other thing that it also means is that it's going to be very loose. So if it is too loose, so if there's too much liquid going on, it will totally just fall apart. And then it won't deep fry at all. So super important, especially because we're using chicken thigh, which has a lot of fat, which is going to give us a lot of like liquid in that fat already. We don't want to introduce any extra liquid that we don't have to be introducing. Cool. So for our marinade, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. And then about a 1/4 teaspoon of white pepper. And that's pretty much it for the whole marinade. So we don't want to do too much else here. Otherwise, we're going to be starting to introduce liquids. The last thing that I'm going to introduce, though, is going to be about a 1/4 teaspoon of cornstarch, probably closer to 1/2 teaspoon of cornstarch. So you will see a cornstarch come up in a lot of Chinese recipes, specifically in like meats and meat marinades. Sometimes even without the marinade, it will just be in the chicken. And that's because one of the big problems with trying to wok fry meats is that because wok heat is extremely hot, it will cook on the exterior a lot faster than it will cook on the interior. There are a couple of ways to solve that issue, but the main way that we solve that issue is by coating the chicken in a little bit of cornstarch, so it slows down that cooking process on the exterior just long enough so that we can get a good solid cook on the inside of the chicken before everything starts overcooking on the exterior. So it's going to slow down the cook time just a little bit, enough so that we can finish cooking it. Am I adding all that fat? Yes, we definitely want all of that fat. If you don't want all of the fat, you could use chicken thigh or chicken breast too. But I mean, I love adding the fat of chicken breast or chicken thigh. I know lots of people like cutting off the fat, but I don't see the point. If you're going to use chicken thigh, you should keep the fat on. That's where all the flavor comes from. So if you chop off that fat, then it's not going to really taste like anything. So I actually think it's a really, really important part, especially in a wok fried chicken thigh. Because what will happen is that all of that fat in the chicken, it's going to render into a liquid form, and then that's going to contribute to everything that we put it into. So that fat is going to end up into the egg foo young itself, and that's going to create a lot of richness. So now, arguably, it might start causing problems with the binding of the egg foo young, but as far as I've tried it so far, it hasn't really caused too much issue. And at the very best, it actually introduces quite a bit extra flavor because you're introducing extra fat. But if you're worried about the fat, you could chop it off. Or I would say, if you're worried about the fat, don't chop it off. Just use a different cut. Just use chicken breast. Good question, though. Cool. So is that it for cutting? I think that is it. This is a big one. All right, let's do some eggs. Hello to everyone just tuning in. I should keep introducing myself. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, I'm here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes. Those are out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came out with the recipe for this egg foo young, which I'm cooking through right now. So if you're looking for those recipes, they all live over on the YouTube channel. Those are coming out every Friday. So last Friday was this egg foo young. Friday before that we did beef chow fun, I think. Friday before that was, I think, chicken katsu. And then I think we did Japanese curry, maybe? I can't remember. But there's those new recipes that are coming out every Friday, so if you haven't checked out what's going on over on the YouTube channel, I highly recommend it. Lots of fun recipes coming up. Pretty much everything that I cook on stream, it has a recipe video that goes along with it. There are a couple of fun series going on. This one that we're doing today is part of a new series that I just started, where I've been basically just reproducing foods from really racist stuff that happened to Asian people in movies. So this one is inspired by a scene from the Aristocats, which recently got pulled from Disney Plus for, I think, that scene, which briefly references egg foo young, and then I made an egg foo young. So if you're looking for stuff like that, or if you're interested in content like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel. Lots of fun stuff like that coming up. We're working our way to 3,500 subs by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit that goal, hop over and check it out. If you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. Good job. Yeah, acrobatic bag. Yeah, if you're making it with tofu, how can you introduce fat? That's a good question. I would say if you're making it with tofu and you're trying to introduce fat, but you don't mind having meat elements in it, that kind of changes things. So I would assume if you're making it with tofu, I would assume you're trying to make it vegetarian. If you're not trying to make it vegetarian, the first thing I would say is use some bacon or pork belly or just pork fat. Pork fat is my favorite kind of fat to introduce. So you could use pork belly, you could use thick cut bacon, you could use pancetta, which would be really great. All of those things, they have a whole bunch of pork fat, which is going to give you like all kinds of flavor. That itself is just like the most amazing kind of flavor. But I would say is if you're making it with tofu, probably the main thing that you're trying to do is make it vegetarian, which in that case, then I would say probably the next best solution is some kind of oil. So sesame oil, probably the best thing. Really, like all of those fats, they come from animal, so that's what makes it tricky. But I would also say, if you're making it with tofu, just leave the fats out, and then just make it a little bit leaner. Cool. So I forgot to count. I think that was 5 eggs. I hope that was 5 eggs. Hopefully I didn't overshoot it. This is going to be our egg foo young. So what we're going to do is throw all of the stuff that we just finished cutting up into here. That's our green onions, which I use ginger and garlic for the chicken. Followed by our onions. And then finally is a little bit of bean sprouts. So if you're like me, if you ever cook with bean sprouts, your bean sprouts will probably end up looking like this at some point. So if you don't use them all, which is very likely because bean sprouts are sold in large quantities and aren't used super often, what will happen is they're going to start shedding their water. So you could kind of see it in the bag already. But at the bottom, all of those bean sprouts are starting to lose their water. And when that happens, essentially what will end up happening is eventually you're just going to have a bag full of like really, really soggy, probably bad, probably spoiled bean sprouts. So these bean sprouts, they're right on the cusp of going bad. I would say within like a week, they're probably bad. Maybe within like 2 or 3 days, they'll probably be bad. Which means that the egg foo young is a perfect solution for these bean sprouts because we got to use them up. They're going to go bad soon. So you can tell because if you look really closely, you see how they're kind of floppy. Bean sprouts are not supposed to be floppy like that. They're supposed to be pretty firm and like filled with water. So you generally don't want your bean sprouts to look like that. If I was making like a pad thai or a pad see, or not a pad see, but a pad thai, or like a beef chow fun, for example, I would not want my bean sprouts to look like that because they're not going to be crunchy at all. So in an egg foo young, it will be perfect though because it's going to be mixed in and then deep fried. So it won't really matter if you have super, super fresh bean sprouts, which is what makes this dish so great. Cool, so this is our egg foo young. What we're going to do is cook up our chicken and then that's going to go into this batter. And then we're going to give all of this a toss and then we're going to deep fry it. By putting a paper, oh delicious, you learned a good tip by putting a paper towel in the bag with the sprouts. I did not know that. I will have to try that. That's been like one of my biggest struggles with buying bean sprouts is because it comes up in a lot of recipes, but only once in a while. Like it will happen, I like need them for a pad thai, and then I won't use them for like another 2 weeks until I make like chow fun or something. And then between those 2 weeks, the rest of the bean sprouts will go bad, which is so frustrating. So I'm definitely going to give that a shot, though. Put a paper towel on it. Probably, but yeah, bean sprouts, I think they probably only have a shelf life of like maybe a week, maybe even less. All right. Anyway, next up we're assembling right now is going to be the gravy of our egg foo young. Now, if you're paying attention, the term gravy never comes up in Chinese food. So right off the bat, if you're trying to figure out what about this dish is authentic, if you see the term gravy used in a Chinese dish, gravy is not ever come from Chinese food. That's definitely a concept that occurs from Chinese American cuisine, or really just American cuisine. My theory is that because Chinese food was served in diners a lot in the 50s, probably in like the early 1900s, my theory is that the term gravy came from when egg foo young was being served in diners. And then what they would do is make those egg foo youngs and then spoon that gravy on top of the egg foo young, and then they'll call it like a gravy. Probably like kind of similar to like a Salisbury steak, I guess. But this is going to be the gravy of our egg foo young. And what we're going to do is we're going to reduce this in our wok with a little bit of that chicken fat. And it's going to give us a real thick and cohesive gravy. So if you are following the written recipe, which I know some folks are doing, I am going to be having this recipe right now. So when I did the original recipe, I discovered that there was a whole lot of extra sauce left over that I did not use, and I ended up throwing it out. So if you're following the written recipe, I think maybe the written recipe is already halved. But what I'm doing right now is chopping my written recipe in half, so I don't have a whole bunch of extra sauce left over. So that was starting off. That was 2 tablespoons, I guess, in half. 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1 tablespoon of dark soy sauce, and 1 tablespoon of oyster sauce. Followed finally by a single tablespoon of sesame oil. 1 tablespoon of hoisin sauce. And finally, 1 tablespoon of doubanjiang. And then what we're going to do is round all of that out with a single cup of stock. So this is beef stock that we're using right now. You could use vegetable stock, you could use chicken stock, you could just use water. I don't think I have a whole cup, so I think I'm going to use as much as I have left, plus a little bit of water. And all of that is just essentially to kind of like loosen up that sauce so that when we go and wok fry it and try and reduce it in the wok, it's going to have some room to sort of like boil and simmer. The one thing that I do want to mention about this gravy is that obviously there are a whole bunch of things that I just put in here. So if you don't have all of those elements, it's totally fine. Really, the one that's most important is probably that oyster sauce, the doubanjiang, and the soy sauce. Those are probably the 3 big ones. And I would say probably the thing that's tying it all together are those 3 elements. So if you don't have everything that I just used here, you could leave it out. In my opinion, what's most important about understanding how to assemble a gravy or a sauce really in general is understanding what each of those elements are doing. So super often when I'll assemble a sauce, I will start off with soy sauce and sesame oil. Those are probably going to be the 2 big ones that are really just like foundational. But then going forward, so we used oyster sauce that's got like kind of like a fishy fermented quality to it, and Shaoxing wine, which has a little bit of brightness because it's made from alcohol. And then the last thing that we used was a tablespoon of hoisin sauce, which is really sweet, so you could think of it as like kind of adding sugar to a recipe. And doubanjiang, which is a little bit of fermented chili paste, so it's going to be introducing a little bit of heat. So each of those respectively are doing their own part. When you assemble a gravy like this and you leave something out, well, I think what's most important when you leave it out is just pay attention to what exactly are you leaving out. Yeah. And then the last thing that we want to do is season it with a pinch of salt to taste. If it doesn't need salt, don't add it. But usually what I like to do is taste it, and if it needs it, give it a pinch. All right, so that's our gravy. And I think we're ready to start cooking. Yeah, oh, acrobatic bike. Yeah, thank you. Good. I'm glad that was helpful. Cool. Sarah, you haven't met a gravy that you didn't like. I've definitely met plenty of gravies that I didn't like. There are like a lot of gravies that like what's really tricky about a gravy is that it will break super easily, which is essentially the fats and like oils separating from the liquid elements. And when that happens, it's really gross. you don't want to eat that gravy. So. Especially when it's made from like animal fat, because then you start seeing the separation of animal fats. That was really gross. All right, last thing that I'm going to assemble right now before we go over to the wok is our cornstarch slurry. So today, you will super often see the use of cornstarch slurry in Chinese cooking because it's the element that we use to thicken up sauces. Today we're going to be using it to thicken up our gravy element. But you will see it come up in a lot of stir fries, so a lot of like General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, kung pao chicken, any of the meatball dishes, really any mapo tofu, all of those dishes that have a thick sauce element to it, that's going to have some element of cornstarch dissolved in water, like what we're doing today, because it's how you thicken up the sauce. So super important element. I would say you can't make Chinese food without cornstarch. Or if you're not using cornstarch, you could do it with potato starch or flour, but some sort of starch to thicken up that sauce. You can't really make thick, cohesive Chinese sauces without a starch like this. Cool, now I think we're ready. Yeah. Low reputation. Oh, you just started watching. Cool. Yeah. Hello. If you're just tuning in, my name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today we're making a Chinese egg foo young, which is kind of like a leftovers dish that comes up in a lot of like Chinese takeout, especially Chinese American takeout. I don't think I've ever come across it in like traditional Chinese food, but it is definitely super common here in the States. Today what we're going to be doing is par cooking our chicken right now. And then what we're going to do is deep fry our egg foo young, which gives us a little bit more of like a lighter and fluffier texture to our egg foo young than relative to like the more commonly found like wok fried egg foo youngs, which are like look more like a scrambled, more like scrambled eggs, so like a scrambled egg pancake basically. So if you've ever had egg foo young before and it like came out a little bit chewy or like rubbery, this is probably going to be the best solution that you'll find is by deep frying it, and it gives us a little bit more area of a texture. But if you don't like deep frying, or if you're just like too lazy, because deep frying takes a little bit of extra effort, you can also just deep fry. You can also just fry it straight after the wok fry, and just skip the deep fry altogether, and it will still taste really great. So, yeah, cool. Karina, oh, you don't cook much Chinese food, but you love eggs. Oh, this is a good one to try then. There's someone asked about this on the YouTube channel a couple days earlier too. There's a whole series on the YouTube channel that's just dedicated, technically it's dedicated to Chinese breakfast foods, but what I've discovered is that really just means eggs. There's just like all of the different uses of eggs in Chinese food. So if you're looking for like uses of eggs in Chinese food, that's a good series to check out. Cool. Before we start cooking, my name is Wesley, this is Wu Can Cook. If you haven't checked out the YouTube channel yet, I definitely recommend hopping over and checking that out. We're concurrently live streaming over on the laptop behind me, so if you look behind me, there's another laptop that's going to the live stream over on YouTube. In addition to that stream, there's also a whole schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking on live stream, so if you want to find out what I'm going to be cooking next, that's a good place to be. There's also new recipe videos, those come out every Friday, so last Friday we came out with the recipe for this egg foo young. Which is part of a series that I've been doing where I've been reproducing just like really terrible racist stuff that happens on TV and film for like Asian stereotypes. So this one comes from the Aristocats, which recently got pulled from Disney+. So if you haven't checked that stuff out, definitely hop over and check out that series. That's all over at youtube.com/WuCanCook. So if you're watching on Reddit, the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. Yay. All right. So when we're heating our wok, the main thing that we're looking for is a little bit of smoke. So if you see all that smoke starting to come up off of your wok, that's generally when you'll know you're about ready to start cooking. I like to give it a little bit of time beyond that smoke point. So I like to let it hit that smoke point and kind of heat up maybe a minute past that point because that's when we'll know it's like really, really hot. And we want it, anytime that you're cooking in a wok on a home range, you want that wok literally as hot as it can possibly get for the entire duration of time. There's really no point in time where you should be turning down the heat on your wok unless you're simmering or like doing a curry. Oh, Karina, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. The gift recipe is super fun sub. Short little one minute recipes, yeah. Yeah, which reminds me, if you found this channel over via gift recipes, the YouTube channel has much longer recipes over on the YouTube channel. So I think everything that's published on gift recipe has a longer version, and in those longer versions, I tend to like talk through some of the decision making that goes behind the recipes and like why I do certain things and why I leave some stuff out, stuff like that. So cool. Arcdules, oh, if animal fats are gross, why do I eat them? Animal fats are not inherently gross. They're just gross when they separate from the things that you're trying to eat. So if you've ever had like a gravy that has a layer of bacon fat sitting on top of it, that's not what it's supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be incorporated into it. So super often I've had a lot of like leftover Thanksgiving turkey gravy, for example, where the fats of the turkey, that's how you make turkey gravy, it separates from the rest of the gravy, and then you have this layer of turkey fat that sits on top of it, which is not attractive. All right, so my wok is nice and hot. I'm adding, this is going to be about 4 tablespoons of peanut oil. And then, as always, make sure you do your nice long meow. And then I'm starting off with my aromatics, so this is my garlic and my ginger going in first. And then I'm going to give that a toss just long enough until it's fragrant, so use your nose. That's usually about 10 seconds for me. And finally is our chicken. So if you timed it right, your chicken should have marinated for about 30 minutes at least. I don't think that's gone for 30 minutes yet, but it'll be okay. All right. And then we're going to let that chicken go for maybe 2 minutes, maybe a little bit less. And you're going to start noticing that that cornstarch is going to start playing a big role here because the exterior of the chicken is going to start cooking a lot faster than the interior of the chicken, which is why it's so important. So we need to slow down that exterior cook to make sure that the chicken cooks all the way through. Otherwise, you're going to end up with one of two things. You might end up with really, really chewy chicken because the exterior is overcooked. Or you could end up with a piece of raw chicken, which is also not good. Carp Diem, yeah, hey, how's it going? So yeah, almost 3,000. Yeah, we're coming up on 3,000 pretty quickly. I think we're like right on the cusp. I think we're short by like 10 or so. But yeah, I mean, 3,000, it doesn't seem like a lot, but to me that's a lot. I like, that's 3,000 people that want to watch these videos is crazy. I never thought 3,000 people would want to watch me cook, so that's cool. All right. This is looking good. We don't need the chicken to be cooked all the way through because you do have to keep in mind that there is going to be an additional cook that follows it in the deep fry. But it will not go for that long. We're only going to be deep frying these patties for like 90 seconds, I think. in total. The eggs cook very, very quickly, which means that the residual cook that's going to happen in the deep fry is going to be really, really short. So we don't need to cook our chicken all the way through, but we do need to cook it like most of the way through. So it needs to be like 90 to 95% cooked, so just shy from finished. And that's going to make sure that we have this nice tender piece of chicken. Yeah. Melbourne, yeah, Nifty Nick, how's it going? Carpe diem, oh yeah, what are we making? We're making egg foo young tonight, which is technically a breakfast food. I think it comes up in dim sum quite a bit. Alright, so that's our chicken. Alright, and I'm just putting that straight into our egg foo young patty. And before we get to our eggs, actually we probably should get to it first. What I want to do is give this a good coating. So we want to get this moving immediately. That chicken is very hot, so you don't want to leave it and let it just sit in the eggs. Because what we'll start doing is going to start scrambling the eggs because the chicken is really, really hot. The eggs are really, really delicate, and eggs will cook in the introduction of literally any kind of heat. So we want to start moving it really quickly. You don't need to. You don't need it to be like constantly moving, but we do want to immediately start agitating it for a couple of seconds at least to make sure that those eggs don't start scrambling. Cool. Yeah. All right. So back over on our wok. You'll notice that there's a whole bunch of stuff left behind. There's a combination of a few things going on in the wok right now. Part of it is what's left behind is a little bit of peanut oil. Most of what's sitting at the bottom, though, is all of that chicken fat. So someone mentioned earlier, are you not going to remove the fat from the chicken? I'm not, because we're going to reserve it. We left most of it. A lot of it ended up in the egg foo young itself, but parts of it, probably a good amount of it, is still sitting here in our wok. And what we're going to do is use that for our gravy. So here's our gravy mixture going in. And what we're doing is essentially deglazing the wok here and removing all of that fat that's left behind. And then using that in our gravy, and that's going to add a nice fatty element to our gravy here. Adding a little bit more water. This is maybe half a cup of water, maybe a little bit less than that, because I'd like to reduce this a little bit more. So anytime that you're working with a liquid element like what we're doing right now, especially if there's acids in it, like our Shaoxing wine, which is what we're using today, but that's also especially true with things like lime juice, lemon juice, vinegars, stuff like that. My general preference is always to try and cook that stuff off a little bit because it's going to be really, really bright and really, really forward. So if you want that, you can leave it, which is sometimes what we do with limes as a garnish. So in the pad thai, for example, we leave the lime and we put it on very, very last, and it's really, really bright because you add it raw. When I'm using it in a gravy, though, I generally want to give that gravy a little bit of an opportunity to cook off some of that acidity so it's not so brash and like harsh. Otherwise, it's going to be right up front. Yeah. Karina, yeah, I don't know. I was surprised that they removed it just because of that one scene. I just thought that was funny. But it is like comically racist, which is yikes. All right. Yeah. Cool, so that's nice and reduced. We're cooking off a little bit of that acidity, and the last thing that we're going to do is add our cornstarch slurry. going to give things a nice thicker quality to it. I'm not going to add all of it here. What we want to do is add it in portions, and then if you need to use all of it to get to that level of thickness that you're looking for, then add all of it. But if you don't need it all, don't add it all. I think we might actually need all of it today. The amount of that cornstarch slurry is going to depend on how much you have reduced the gravy itself. If you didn't reduce it very much, then you might not need all of it. Today, I think we need all of it because I did add a bit of extra water. Damn racist cats, yeah. Yikes. Disney. Alright, so that's the thickness that we're looking for. If you want a really thick gravy, you could let it go for even longer. I like my gravy to be a little bit loose here, so I'm going to let this go maybe another minute. What I'm generally looking for, especially with gravies, is that you can see at the edges here that it's going to start like boiling up, and essentially what that's happening right here is all of the like sugar structures are starting to crystallize. We don't want that to let that happen because it will eventually start burning, but that's generally a sign that you're starting to get like a nice thick gravy element going. All right. So that's our gravy, and that's going to be the finishing element to our egg fouillon. We still need this. And then what we're going to do is rinse out our wok. We definitely want to remove all of the stuff before we start wok frying, or deep frying, excuse me, not wok frying. And then I'm going to reheat our wok, let it dry off. I usually like to burn off this oil, or burn off this water. Generally, when you're deep frying, you want to try and avoid any extra liquid in your wok, because what will happen is when water meets hot oil, it's going to start sputtering. So if you're trying to avoid all of that really violent sputtering in deep frying, try and reduce as much liquid in that wok as possible before you add your fryer oil. Yes. Cool. Thick gravy, yeah. 2 seeds. There it is. Alright, so I'm adding my fryer thermometer, and we're gonna get ready to start deep frying. Alright, so that's my fryer oil going in. We need that to be at 350, so that's going to take maybe 5 minutes to heat up, maybe a little bit less than that. So we're going to let that fryer oil heat up, and then we're going to start frying. So if you've ever tried to fry or deep fry an egg before, you will know that these are going to deep fry really, really quickly. So it kind of reminds me of how quickly like a apple fritter or like a peach fritter fries, because it's really, really loose, which means that it will, like, no kidding, it's going to finish frying in like a minute, maybe a little bit less than that even, because eggs are so delicate. So it's very different from if you were trying to deep fry chicken, for example, where we need to leave it in so that we can keep or like cook up the entire piece of chicken, because the chicken is going in raw. In this case, pretty much everything is just already cooked. So there's nothing about this that needs to be cooked other than the eggs. So we just need to cook up the eggs itself, which is already very, very delicate. And that's all we're really trying to do here. Cool. All right. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. With new recipes coming out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came out with an egg foo young recipe, which was super fun. That's what we're cooking through right now. Super often, if you tune into the live streams on Mondays, generally what I'm doing is probably going to be cooking through the recipe that came out on Friday, last Friday. So last Friday we came out with this recipe for this egg foo young. Today on Monday we're cooking through the recipe ourselves. So if you're trying to figure out what to cook next, I recommend hopping over to that YouTube channel and checking out some of those recipe videos. The recipe videos, they generally move a little bit slower and kind of like talk through some of the decision making that goes behind the things that I do in recipes, and like why I add certain things, why I leave some stuff out, and like why I like make certain decisions in general. So in this particular instance, the egg foo young that we're approaching today is using a deep fry, which is pretty uncommon in like most Chinese egg foo youngs, probably because the more common version of egg foo young that you'll come across is not deep fried. It's probably going to be scrambled, so scrambled and then wok fried, and then it ends up looking a little bit like a frittata, where it's kind of like a circular, like round shape because of its fry in the wok fry. So if you don't like deep frying, you can totally just wok fry this. At this point, you could skip the deep fry and then just go straight into wok frying it and throw it into the wok, just like any other scramble, and it will turn out just the same. Or not the same, but it will turn out good. In this particular case, I love doing the deep fry, which is what we're going to do today, because it results in like a more fluffy and like airier egg foo young than you would generally otherwise be able to get if you were to scramble and then wok fry your egg foo young. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel and check out what's going on over there. We're working our way to 3,500 subs by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit that goal, hop over and check it out. I think we're at close to 3,000 right now. Right now, we're waiting for our wok to heat up, so we're at just past 220, so we need that to be at 350. What I like to do is aim a little bit past 350, so right around like 360, 365-ish. And what that's going to do is it's going to accommodate for the fact that your egg mixture is going to be a little bit colder, a lot colder than the oil. So as soon as we put that egg foo young batter into the wok fry, it's going to change the temperature of the egg oil. So whenever you hear a deep fryer sputtering, it's the sign that the oil is starting to cool down. So that's going to accommodate for the fact that the oil is cooling down as soon as we add stuff. So every time that we finish cooking a patty, we're going to wait and then reheat it back up to close to like 360, 365, and then make sure that we're cooking on that nice high heat. So we want to pay attention and make sure that that heat is right around 350, 360, and especially want to make sure that it doesn't drop below 350, because if your oil is below 350, then you're going to end up with like consistency problems. And if it gets too cold, so if it drops below like 300, you're definitely going to run into issues with binding, because the batter is not going to hold together anymore. Cool. Yeah. Cool. What else? What else can I say? If you have any questions, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about egg foo young, but I know lots of stuff. This particular version of egg foo young, I've been eating Chinese food since I was a little kid, and I've honestly maybe once in my entire life had egg foo young. That's mainly because egg foo young is not really a traditional Chinese dish. It mostly comes from like Chinese American takeout. So you will see it super often here in the States at like Americanized Chinese takeout places. Probably not in places like Panda Express and stuff, but generally like that Chinese takeout spot that's on the corner, like around the corner from you, probably has egg foo young. And that's because egg foo young is the recipe that a lot of restaurants will use to use up their leftover ingredients. So today what we're using is a couple of things that I had left over that actually follows pretty closely to the original recipe that I had written. So I'm using half of a sweet white onion and some leftover bean sprouts, both of which were left over from, the onion was left over from a pad kee mao recipe that I did yesterday, and the bean sprouts are left over, I think, from the chow fun that we did on live stream, I think last Monday. So those bean sprouts are pretty old. So one of my favorite things is to find solutions for how to make use of things that are going to spoil very, very soon. So the big one that spoils on me all the time is bean sprouts. So I'm excited to have a use for these bean sprouts because they always are constantly spoiling. What hair wax do I use? It's the funny question. I use a Crew, I think. Crew something. Yeah, I forget what it's called. Crew something. That's a really random question. All right, 320. We're at 320. We're waiting for 350, so we got another 30 degrees to go. Cool, yeah, so there's a couple of different series that are going on over on the YouTube channel. Probably the one that people have been watching most is the Chinese American food hack series, which is really fun because essentially what I've been doing is deconstructing a lot of Chinese American classics, so things like Panda Express stuff, so like General Tso's chicken and honey sesame chicken. Egg foo young is a very common Chinese American dish. And then what I've been doing is like reconstructing some of those dishes in the lens of traditional Chinese cuisine. So like what would General Tso's chicken look like if it were cooked in actual traditional Chinese wok fry techniques. So some of those things are very, very interesting because a lot of those dishes don't have any context for like traditional Chinese food. So like more specifically, like a General Tso's chicken is really just American fried chicken with like a sweet and sour sauce that's coated in it. I guess like sweet and savory sauce. So I think the version of General Tso's chicken that we did was based off of the Panda Express version, but I used I think I used black bean sauce, which is really, really uncommon. You would probably, first of all, you never see that in General Tso's chicken, but secondly, you generally don't see that in stir fries. You most commonly would see that in noodle dishes, so dajiangmian is probably the most popular use of black bean sauce. So that's a really fun series that we've been doing. Lots of fun approaches, like really uncommon approaches to Chinese, Americanized Chinese cooking. That's very interesting. So if you're interested, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel and check out some of those recipes. Those are coming out every Friday. So this Friday coming up is going to be, what are we doing this Friday? I think we're doing bibimbap. That's coming up. Bibimbap, which is a Korean rice bowl. Cool. All right, so dryer rack set up. And I think we're at 350. Yeah, 360, cool. All right, so we're sitting at, right now we're right at 360, I think 365. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna very carefully ladle this into our wok. And very slowly let it drop in. So if you drop it in too fast, it will start separating. Remember, what you're dropping in is very, very loose egg. So we don't want that to separate. We don't want it to pull apart. And what we're doing, this is gonna go for 40 seconds on the first side and then 30 seconds on the second side. So very, very short. That's gonna be in the fryer for a little over a minute. What's my favorite recipe from my childhood? Ooh, good question. I think my favorite one, I think it was the first recipe that I did on the channel, which is a mapo tofu, it's based off of my grandma's mapo tofu. So, and a mapo tofu is a really, really common Szechuan wok fry. But it's just like one of those dishes that I've been eating since I was a little kid. So. All right, so there's our flip, and we're gonna give that another 60 seconds. So, but yeah, I also have been working on getting all of my mom and my grandma's recipes, but I don't think I'm ever gonna get them all. At one point I tried, and I got the original Japanese curry recipe from my mom, which is technically a Chinese curry. And I tried it, and it was not the right recipe because I don't think my mom had been following the written recipe for very long. She had probably started off with that recipe and then just deviated from it very, very quickly. And then whatever she was making was not that recipe anymore. So at this point, I've kind of just given up on trying to get the original versions of all of my grandma and my mom's and my dad's recipes because I don't think they have written versions. I think they're just going off of whatever's in their head. All right. Alright, so real quick, so I just pulled out our first patty. We're at, the oil is down to 330, so we're gonna let that reheat real quick. Real quick so we can take a look. Here's our first finished patty. And you'll notice that it has lots of like interesting and like airy textures to it. So all of that coming from the deep fry. So this is all of the stuff that we're looking for here. So all of these like spidering and all of this like interesting like textures that's coming from it, you would not be able to get that if you were just straight up frying it. You'll also notice that it's very, very puffy. That's also coming from the deep fry, which you would not be able to do if you were just straight up deep frying or frying. COVID 2100, yeah, that's a good question. Egg foo young is probably not commonly found deep fried. Probably more commonly when you get egg foo young, you would see it scrambled. Scrambled and then like wok fried. So you would more commonly see it done as like a big old patty that's cooked and fried in a wok. So the approach that we're doing it today, I think comes from like a more traditional approach. I'm not sure exactly, but I think it's like really, really interesting. And the original recipe that gave me the idea for this comes from Woks of Life, which is one of my favorite blogs. I love everything they do. Those guys are so awesome. Yeah, your mom never gives you measurements. Yeah, that's the exact same problem that I have. I've also been trying to like get a good like idea of my dad's original bolognese recipe, which I have no idea. He hasn't even made it in a long time, so I don't even know that he remembers it anymore. But stuff like that, that's definitely like a lot of the recipes that live over on the YouTube channel are things like that. They're things that like come from my childhood. That's my best attempt at reproducing the original version that I was eating when I was a kid. All right, so here's our next patty going in. And again, very slowly and very carefully letting this fall into the wok. Oops. On camera. Yeah. You have to fiddle with them a bit. A little bit, in my experience, a little bit is an understatement. With all of my mom's recipe, all of my parents' recipes, I've had to fiddle with it to the point where it's like not even it anymore. I think the original mapo tofu recipe that I had written, the only thing that like is at all similar is the fact that it contains peas, because that's how my grandma used to make it. But I don't think that there is a written version. My grandma passed away when I was a kid, so she didn't pass it down. I don't think my dad knows the original version either, so I might be lost forever. But yeah, that was also one of the very first recipes that I put out on the Wu Can Cook channel. All right, so here's our flip. Always remember to flip away from you so you don't splash yourself with hot oil. The fried egg looks, yeah, phenomenal. Yeah, if you've never tried to deep fry an egg, I highly recommend it. It is one of the like most amazing things that I've ever deep fried. Honestly, you can deep fry anything and it's gonna be good, but a deep fried egg, it's awesome. You should definitely try it. How do I dispose of my frying oil? Good question. Lots of people ask that. There's honestly like not a real good solution to disposing of fryer oil. The main thing that I've figured out is how to reuse your fryer oil, which you could probably get a good like 4 or 5, maybe 6 times, depending on what you're frying, at least 4 or 5 uses, maybe 5 to 6 times, by passing it through a coffee. So I usually pass mine through a cold brew coffee filter, which is meant for cold liquids. It takes a little bit of time, probably about like an hour to like finish filtering an entire batch of oil. But if you filter it after every use, you could probably get at least 4 or 5. Usually I run mine like at least 5 times, sometimes 6 times if what I'm cooking did not require a lot of frying. But then after that, it's really just about recycling. I usually store mine with the motor oil that I use when I like change the oil in my car. And then I take it to a recycling plant after that. All right. Here's our second run. These generally start looking better the more that I do them. Probably the sixth one, I think, is going to be the best looking one. The fryer oil is back down to 320, so I'm going to let that reheat for a second. We can take a look at our finished egg foo youngs. This recipe, I think it should yield 6. Generally, it depends how hungry you are, but 6 egg foo young patties probably should feed at least 2, maybe 3 people. Kind of depends how hungry you are. Yeah, you've changed a few of your mom's recipes a little bit, yeah. Honestly, I've stopped trying to ask them. Usually what I'll do is I'll write a recipe and then I'll consult my parents. And they always have a lot of times they're very opinionated about it. But honestly, I feel like most of the time they don't remember. I don't think they remember. I think most of the time they were probably just ad-libbing and just kind of winging it. So definitely a lot of my mom's recipes, they probably live up in her head and then she's forgotten a lot of them. All right, here's a third patty going in. Once again, very slowly and very gently dropping it in. If you drop it in too quickly, it will probably separate because it is very, very loose. So we want to make sure that patty goes in very, very slowly so it doesn't start spreading out. What's really the only thing that's holding it together, remember that it's just scrambled eggs. The only thing that's holding it together is the fact that the eggs are cooking almost immediately as soon as they hit that oil. So if you let it all cook and spread out as soon as you throw it in, it's going to cook but in separate directions. So it's going to fly all over the wok oil, and then you're going to have egg foo young all over the deep fryer oil, which is not good. So anytime that we're frying these eggs, we want to make sure that we're dropping it in really, really slowly. Otherwise, it's going to end up everywhere. All right. So that's 30 seconds on the first side, probably 40 seconds, yeah. And then here's our flip. Once again, anytime that you're flipping in a deep fryer, flip away from you. Ooh, we're getting a little low. Yeah, your favorite part of cooking is changing the flavor, accentuating it as you go. Yeah, that's generally a thing that I mention anytime that folks try and reproduce the recipes that I'm cooking. Is that you can follow the recipes, but I think at the end of the day, you're gonna have to taste it and then adjust. So I very often, so you'll see when you see me cooking, there's always gonna be a recipe book that's next to the thing that I'm cooking. So you can kind of see it. Alright, so here's my recipe book. This is what we're following today. And it's always right here, so I'm always cooking from this recipe book. But super, super often, I'm probably not even following exactly what I had written down. And that's because really, really often when I cook something, I'll cook it, or I'll finish combining the ingredients, and then that's the most important step, is taste it. And when you taste it, what does it taste like? And then if it needs something, then you're gonna have to adjust. So you can follow a recipe to a T, and it might not taste correct, and then you have to adjust. So that's gonna be super common, it's totally fine. But just don't be afraid to adjust the recipe, to make sure that it tastes right. So I'm giving this egg foo young a flip because the oil is a little bit cold and I don't think the first side finished cooking all the way through. Yeah. What's inside of the egg foo young patty? Today our egg foo young contains there's half of a white onion, a bunch of bean sprouts, and then the whites of our green onions, just the whites, and then a couple of chicken thighs. So there's 2 chicken thighs, which we rendered out the fat, and then that fat stayed in our gravy for the most part. I mentioned this earlier too, is that anytime that you're making egg foo young, this is especially true for egg foo young. Also kind of true for most wok cooking though in general. Is that especially with this dish though, it's meant to be a recipe for reusing leftovers. So if you don't have exactly what I'm using, I recommend using whatever you have. So today we're using chicken thigh and an onion. If you don't have those things though, use what you got. So here's our third patty. This one is a little bit underdone. Underdone is going to be totally fine because it just means that your eggs are going to be a little bit loose. Stupid camera. Yeah, underdone is going to be fine because it just means your eggs are going to be a little bit loose, which is fine. But we want to generally avoid making sure that doesn't happen because it will eventually start causing the patty to separate, which is what was starting to happen. So we don't want that to happen. So in order to make sure that that doesn't happen, we want to make sure that before we add the next patty, we reheat the wok and make sure that it gets nice and hot. And what we should be doing, which I didn't do because I'm lazy, so we want to fish out all of this stuff that's stayed behind. So all these things that's creating all this foam. We don't want that to hang out in our fryer. It's generally going to be okay, but if you let it accumulate too much, what eventually will happen is it's going to start sticking to the next patty that you throw in, and then you're going to have burnt stuff stuck to the patty. So all of this stuff that's creating this foam here, that's just stuff that didn't get stuck to the patty, so little bits and pieces of onion and chicken and stuff that didn't stick. So if you see that stuff staying behind, get your sieve out, fish it out. All right, my fryer oil is at 350. I'm going to let that reheat closer to 360 to accommodate for temperature changes. Good question. If I was making shrimp egg foo young, which is probably the more common use. Is shrimp egg foo young. I really don't like shrimp, so I don't use a lot of shrimp in my cooking. But yeah, if you are using shrimp, would you reduce the cook time to accommodate for carryover? Shrimp would definitely make it a little bit tricky because shrimp is really, really delicate. What I would do is I would probably undercook the shrimp a little bit more. So what we did, so we're using chicken thigh today. And I did undercook the chicken thigh by a little bit. I think it was at probably 90-95% done. It was probably to the point where you could have probably eaten it, and it would just be a little bit tender. It would probably be like a really piece of chicken, really good tasty piece of chicken because it would be nice and tender and slightly under. If I was using a shrimp, what I would have done is when I would par cook it. So before it goes into the batter, we're going to par cook it, and then what I would have done is probably cooked it at really, really early. So I would probably only have cooked it 50% of the way, and then put it in the batter because shrimp cooks really quickly. So shrimp probably will finish cooking in you could wok fry shrimp, and it will finish cooking within a minute, maybe even less than that, because shrimp is really, really delicate. So I would probably have only done that par cook for half a minute, maybe 45 seconds, and then pulled it out and then put it in the batter. And then let it cook the rest of the way in the batter. That's a good question, though. But today we're using chicken thigh, which is a lot more sturdy and would not have finished cooking in the egg fry or the deep fry because we're only deep frying for this is only frying for maybe a little over a minute altogether. Here's our fourth patty. Yeah, this is the fourth patty going in. Yeah, good question though. Yeah, so if I definitely though using shrimp makes it a little bit more difficult. Just any time that you're working with shrimp, it's a little bit more difficult because shrimp is really delicate. So it's it makes it a little bit more difficult to work with. But yeah, definitely I would say when you par cook that shrimp, undercook it a little bit. What does the patty consist of before I cook it? Before I fried it? Yeah, so there's a couple things. So there's chicken thigh is probably the main protein. But then it's also half of an onion, the whites of our green onions, and then a whole bunch of bean sprouts. But you could use whatever you want. It's meant for leftovers, so use whatever you have. Those are the leftovers that I had. But you could, if you have some leftover bell pepper is really good in an egg foo young. I love using that. Someone mentioned shrimp earlier, so if you have shrimps or prawns, you could throw those in. Probably chop them up a little bit. If you've got Zucchini would be really good. Really common one is like ground meat, so ground pork or ground turkey, ground beef, ground chicken. All of those things probably be really good in it. Really, it's about like what do you have left over and do you need to use it up? So for me, what was about to spoil were those bean sprouts. So I really needed to use those bean sprouts up because if we didn't use them today, they're probably going to get thrown out. And there's actually a little bit of bean sprouts left that I'm probably going to throw out after this because they're going to spoil. Yeah. Heist title, yeah, you should get a wok, yeah. I feel like everyone should get a wok. It's a very versatile cookware. Alright. Here's our fourth patty. And our fryer oil is at 340, so I'm going to let that reheat one more time. I think we got enough for maybe one more. Hot like GME, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think probably the best looking one was the second one. This one's a little bit loose. This one's actually looking pretty good. And then maybe this last one might look the best. It's kind of like pancakes, generally the first one. This was the first one. And it's not my best one. I will probably eat it though still. Alright, let's do our last one. So our oil is coming up on 360, which is nice and hot. And here goes our last Patreon patty. Ooh. What's the name of the wok blog I mentioned? Yeah, they're called Woks of Life. They're a recipe blog, and it's run by, I don't know them personally. It's just a blog that I follow, and they're really, really great. It's run by a woman, I think it's run by the whole family, and they're a family of immigrants, and I think one of their older relatives owned a Chinese takeout restaurant. So a lot of their recipes are like how you would cook in like a Chinese takeout restaurant. So it's really interesting because it's like a really interesting perspective to like Chinese takeout. Another one of my favorite blogs is a blog called Chinese Cooking Demystified, which is like the other end of the spectrum. I think they're based out of like Guangzhou, I think somewhere in China, in like mainland China, which means that all of the ingredients that they're using are like ingredients you probably won't find them here. Because they're like some of the real deal, like they make tasyu. That's the only place that I've found like a recipe for how to make tasyu. Which no one makes tasyu because it's really hard and like really time consuming. And you need a lot of ingredients that you generally are not going to find in the States. But that blog is really interesting and like just like fun to like read up on because they're doing stuff that you're generally not going to be able to do. This is cool. Yeah. So if you're paying attention, I don't like all of this foam that's coming up. That's a sign that there's probably a couple of things. The main sign is that the oil is not hot enough. It's also a sign that there's too much debris that's floating around in the oil. It's probably fine because we're very nearly done. I think there's maybe like half a patty left to cook. But generally, if you see that happen in your oil, probably you need to clean the oil. So there's probably a lot of stuff that I gotta fish out. But in this case, it's fine. I'm not that concerned. I'm mostly concerned because I can't see the patty right now. Cool. All right. Let's cook up the remainder. So this last one is probably going to be like a half batch. Probably should have reheated the wok, but I'm not going to bother. While that's going, let's take a look. Here's our finished patties. Here's our very last one. This is probably like the crispiest. I still think that this probably is the one that came out the best. That's probably the one I'm going to put on the plate. Omnivore's Cookbook, yeah, that's a really good one too. Yeah, there's a lot of good ones. If you're into like Korean cooking, I was just working on a recipe for bibimbap, and a lot of the research I was doing was looking up a blog called Korean Bapsang, which is really interesting. I think it's a family of people that are writing those recipes, and they got a lot of cool things. So Korean recipes, that's a good spot. But yeah, generally most of the things that I cook probably coming from Chinese cooking though. So real quick, we could take a look. This last one is probably not going to turn out great because I didn't reheat the oil. So you'll notice our fryer oil is coming all the way down. We're close to like 300 right now, which is not a good sign. So if you're deep frying and you see this happening, so all of this foam, that's a bad sign. It probably means that your fryer oil is too cold. In our case, it's fine because this is the very last one, and it's honestly not even a full patty, so I'm not too worried. But generally, if you see that happening in your fryer oil, all that foam, probably not a good sign. Let's pull this out. Cool. And here's the last one. There's a little baby one. All right, so the last thing that we want to do anytime that we finish cooking in a wok is clean your wok. So while it's hot, give it a clean. So I'm removing my fry oil first, very carefully. And then I'm going to rinse it down. And then let it reheat. So, super important while that wok is hot, make sure that you clean it. Because if you've ever tried to clean a cold wok, it is very difficult because everything that you just cooked is going to stick to the wok, and then you have to start scrubbing it off, which is not good. But while the wok is hot, it has a very nice non-stick surface, which is really useful to clean off, because all you really have to do is rinse that stuff off and it's just going to slide right off. Kind of similar to what happens when you rinse a Teflon pan. But if you let it set and you let it cool down, all of that stuff, it's going to stick to the wok, so don't let that happen in your woks. Give it a clean, and then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm drying it off, reheating it, and then we're adding a little bit of peanut oil here, giving everything a good coat. And that's going to prevent any kind of carbonizing or rusting, all that stuff that we don't want happening. And now your wok is ready to use again tomorrow. What kind of fryer oil did I use? Yeah. So for the fryer oil, I think I was just using canola oil. Usually when I deep fry, it's just the cheapest kind of oil that I can find, and that's mostly just because I replace it so often that it doesn't make any sense to use fancy oil for the fryer because I have to replace it so often. So the one that I'm using for the fryer, I think it's Mazola, and the only reason that I'm using Mazola is because I could get it for like $3 for like a bottle of like 32 ounces or something. So that's like good. But I don't like cooking with Mazola oil because it has like an aftertaste when it gets too hot. And then you can kind of like taste the canola, which is a little bit gross. So usually when I'm wok frying, when you see me wok frying, I'm probably either using grapeseed oil or peanut oil. So today I'm using peanut oil. Alright, so let's plate this up. Clear some space here. So I'm serving this with a little bit of rice, followed by, where are my green onions? There they are. The greens of my green onions. And then finally, our gravy mixture going on top. Alright, and that ought to do it. I guess we could plate it. Nah, I'm not even going to bother. I'm not even going to pretend like I'm going to eat this with chopsticks. You won't be able to eat this with chopsticks. If you see someone try to eat this with chopsticks, it's impossible because, first of all, you're not going to be able to separate the patty with chopsticks. But also, like, if you've ever tried to eat off of a flat plate with chopsticks, it's almost impossible because you can't pick anything up. So I'm not even good. Especially if you see me plate a flat plate with chopsticks, I'm probably going to eat it with a fork right after I take it off camera. But the chopsticks look really pretty. But today, I'm not even going to pretend like I'm going to do that. I'm definitely eating this with a fork. You didn't know that you oil the outside of the wok too? Yeah, so acrobatic bike, so it depends on what kind of wok you have. In my case, the wok is made out of carbon steel, and the whole thing is made out of carbon steel. So you don't need to do that with like heavy bottom pans. So like if you have a carbon steel pan and it has a heavy bottom to it, that's not necessarily made out of carbon steel, you don't need to oil that bottom of that carbon steel pan. But if you have, like, say, cast iron pans, for example, cast iron pans are entirely made out of cast iron. Literally the whole thing, including the handle, is all made out of cast iron. In my case, that wok is the whole thing. It's literally just one giant piece of carbon steel that's shaped into a wok, which means that if it's made out of carbon steel, you have to oil the whole thing, because what you're trying to do, it's not just for, when you oil it, it's not just to develop a cooking surface. What you're also doing is making sure that it doesn't rust. So anything that's not covered in that oil will probably have a potential to start rusting, especially if you live somewhere humid. So if you live like in Hawaii, or if you live somewhere tropical, anywhere where there's salt in the air, if you live near the ocean, like the Bay Area, for example, the salt in the air will start causing corrosion, and it will cause the metal itself to start corroding. So when that happens, that's when that's probably the only time where you'll ever come across the issue of you might end up ruining the pan. And that's one of the only circumstances where I'll say is you might actually ruin a cast iron pan or a carbon steel pan, is if it starts rusting. That's generally, it can still be saved, but if it rusts bad enough, you might have to throw it out. So the only thing that we really need to prevent is making sure that thing doesn't rust. So cover the whole thing in oil, and that will prevent it from start rusting. Yeah. Looks great. Yeah, thanks, Delicious. What do I do with the leftover oil? Yes. Marinade, yeah, someone asked that earlier too. This oil, I think that was maybe the third or fourth time that I've used it. So I'm gonna pass that through. First of all, I'm gonna let it cool down first. And then once it's cold, that will probably take almost 24 hours. So probably some like midday tomorrow. I'm gonna pass it through a cold brew coffee filter. You could just use a regular paper coffee filter too. Cold brew coffee filters, they work faster though. And then I'm gonna filter out all the junk that's left behind. That also helps clarify it a little bit. And then I'm probably gonna be able to I might be able to get like one or maybe two more uses out of it, depending on what I use it for next. But then after that, once it's eventually the oil gets so dark that it's not usable anymore. And then once it hits that point, then the only real solution that I've found, at least, unless someone knows something different, the only real solution after that is take it to a recycling plant. So I change my own motor oil too. So usually what I'll do is I'll stash it with the motor oil. So I already have I think like 8 quarts of motor oil stacked up that I need to recycle. And then next to that is a couple quarts of fryer oil, and that all lives in my garage. And then eventually, probably like once or twice a year, I'll probably take it out to the recycling plant and then get it recycled. But otherwise, though, you can't put it down the drain, you can't throw it out, don't put it in landfill, you can't recycle it. None of those things, all of those are dangerous. Definitely don't pour it down your drain because it will clog your pipes. You can't put it in recycling or landfill because you can't landfill oil. So otherwise, really the only solution is take it to a recycling plant. If someone knows a different solution, please let me know. But as far as I know, those are the only real ways of disposing fryer oil. Cool. Let's try this. Yeah, that's really good. It's like super fluffy and super airy, really tender. The chicken is like just right. The chicken has a lot of moisture to it, and all that fat. I think the fat from the chicken thigh plays really nicely. And then all of the veggies have like really crisped up. And that's like all of these like little stringy bits. That's all coming from the bean sprouts and the onions, so that's really nice texture going on. And then the gravy is like filled with umami and like a lot of flavor. Some nice heat from that doubanjiang. I might put a little bit more heat on it, maybe a little bit of salt. And honestly, like one of my new favorite things to deep fry right now. So cool. Yeah. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If I missed any questions, feel free and repeat yourself. I'll be here doing dishes. I know I miss questions all the time, so if I miss something, feel free and repeat. If you haven't yet, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel and check out what's going on over there. Lots of fun content coming out. New recipes are coming out every Friday. So this egg foo young recipe came out last Friday in an homage to the Aristocats, which was fun. What did we do? Friday before that was beef chow fun, which came out last Friday or 2 Fridays ago. And then before that, I think was chicken katsu, and I can't remember what came out after that. But every Friday there's new recipe videos coming out, so if you haven't yet, definitely hop over to the YouTube and check out what's going on over there. We're working our way to 3,500 subs by the end of April, so if you want to help us hit that goal, hop over and subscribe. If you're not interested, please don't subscribe. I don't know why people subscribe when they're not interested. It's really dumb. Let's see, what else? But tomorrow we're going to be doing, I think we're making pad thai tomorrow, so we'll be back at 6:30 PST tomorrow doing pad thai. Cool. All right, thanks. Oh, last thing I'll mention, lots of people have been looking for the beats. There's a new beat that came out over on the Woo Cooks Beats channel. That's called, it's a lo-fi remix of Tennessee Whiskey that features a friend of mine. His name is Jay. So if you haven't checked that out, I'll link all of that stuff and check out the beats. Cool. All right, I'll see y'all soon. Bye.
whiskey. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. Your bed warm, glass of brandy. Darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time.
Slow. If you come over and start up a conversation with just me, then trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop, put Ben the Man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. Now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me, said boy. Let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead.
I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room. Now my bed sheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you.
One weekend we let the story begin. We're going out on our first date. You and me are thrifty, so go all you can eat. Fill up your bag and I fill up a plate. We talk for hours and hours about the sweet and the sour and how your family is doing okay. We'll even get in a taxi. We'll kiss in the backseat. Tell the driver make the radio play. Now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. You said, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead.
I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room. And now my bed sheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with your body. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you.
Come on, be my baby, come on. 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 Come on, be my baby, come on.
Come on, be my baby, come on.